When I first got into Warhammer 40K about 2 decades ago, the setting spun a tale of a massive place with untold mysteries, horrific monsters, and even scarier phenomena that could make billions of humans disappear in an instant. The Space Marines were neat and all, but you know, they were biologically engineered warriors. What's new? Well, as I opened the Space Marine Codex for the first time, which yes, took a full edition, a specific unit caught my eye. Ghostly warriors that nobody knows anything about. They are impervious to most physical attacks, their bolt rounds glow with righteous flame, and they even kidnap fellow Space Marines to join their terrifying ranks. And oh boy, those models absolutely slapped. Originally, the Legion of the Damned was a concept from a White Dwarf article that eventually received a complete unit entry, complete with detailed lore, in the 5th edition Space Marine Codex. At least that's what I thought, because when I started researching the Legion of the Damned, I realized that there is a whole lot more lore on them than people give them credit for. They didn't just get a codex entry, a White Dwarf article here and there, and maybe even a supplement. No, they got short stories, roles and campaign books, and an entire novella that nobody ever talks about. Funnily enough, 90% of the theories that people post online on where the Legion of the Damned originally came from, what their actual goals are, and how they seem to be capable of time travel, nearly all of them have already been answered in the lore. It's just an absolute pain to find those sources, so most people don't even know they exist. So in today's video, I am going to cover everything you need to know about the Legion of the Damned. We are going to take a look at their canonical origins, their surprising opinions on the Imperium, and why after all of this time, they keep kidnapping random Space Marines for a debt the Imperium apparently owes them. As per usual, all sources used will be shown in the bottom left hand corner throughout the video, just in case you want to check the books I have used, or just want to read these awesome stories for yourself. Alright, enough talking, let's get into the lore. Of all the legends of the Imperium, of all the brave heroes from the humble guardsmen to the Primarchs themselves, there are perhaps none as strange and infamous as the spectral Legion of the Damned. These warriors are whispered about with suspicion by the servants of the Emperor. They are an unbeatable force from beyond the veil of reality, an army manifesting directly from the Emperor's vengeance. When the light of hope flickers, the fire of this legion is what appears against it. Their presence is unforgiving. All who dare trespass against the holy sites of the Emperor, who dare attack the faithful or bring ruin to mankind's domain, will face their wrath. They appear unasked for, there's no negotiating with them. At first glance, these damned legionaries appear as the angels of death. But their achievements in battle are so much more. While battling their enemies, the damned leave behind no fallen. They appear and reappear out of nowhere. Fog, flame and shadows often follow these accursed crusaders. When their bloody work is complete, the Legion disappears as it appeared, while the scribes write endless honor scrolls for the Adeptus Astartes. No such record exists for the Legion. Those who are saved are left speechless, some go mad, and others are forever grateful for their intervention. In battle, the Legion unleashes many unnatural abilities. To the Imperium, their attacks are silent. Often, the only trace of their presence left is the utter obliteration of their enemies. Yet the enemies who fall at their hands tell an altogether different story. What are their origins? Are they a continual manifestation of the Emperor's wrath that he unleashed during the War of the Webway? Perhaps they might be the avenging spirits of a chapter lost in the warp. Or are they time travelers, and that is why the Ordo Chronos is chasing them? But the bigger question is, where is the Legion today? As the Imperium was on the edge of annihilation, the Legion appeared all over the galaxy. But ever since the Fall of Cadia, the Legion has vanished. To start this video out, we are first going to cover every single proven fact about their existence. This means that every source used in the following section is either cross-referenced in multiple books, or has been repeated on the Warhammer community page, or within a White Dwarf at any point in time. Little is truly known about the Legion. What is undeniable, however, is the foresight of the Legion with which they manifest to save the Imperium from disaster. Across the galaxy, the Legion of the Damned have appeared on apocalyptic battlefields, aboard ships during desperate boarding actions, and each time without warning. Their arrival is often heralded by fog and clouds of sulphurous flames. Legionaries strike from nothingness, with weapons already firing. An entire enemy advance can collapse in mere moments upon the arrival of the Legion. They fight with terrible efficiency. Their lips are silent as not a single word is uttered in hate or pain. Their armor is the deepest black, consuming any light that comes into contact with it. It is further decorated with bones and symbols of death. Worse yet is the fire that surrounds them. However, these ghost-like flames are of little consequences to those they came to save, but burn anyone who stands against them. The Legion of the Damned also fight without any concern for their own safety. They will march straight into artillery or machine gun fire, but emerge unscathed. On occasion, these legionaries refuse to succumb to anything less than the firepower of a tank. A blow that should have crippled a space marine leaves the armor of the damned without so much as a scratch. When they get close to their enemies, the legionaries are masters of close combat, using brutal strength and quick blows to beat any opponent into a bloody pulp. Among the Adeptus Astartes who witnessed the Legion, the efficiency on display leaves them utterly stunned. Although mostly, if not completely, devoid of emotion, the Legion invokes a burning vengeance first and foremost on their enemies. Not only do their bolters ignite the very air with ghost-like fire, but not a single recording ever exists of a legionary reloading. Everything about the Legion of the Damned, even the fundamentals of Astartes killing tactics that the Legion gives its unique spin on, has left Imperial scholars baffled. Once the Legion has turned the tide of battle or left the enemy utterly vanquished, they vanish. First-hand witnesses say the legionaries disappeared in the blink of an eye, and others claim to see a brief shimmer before they disappear. These same disappearances leave any recording devices with static. Monitoring devices that try to take evidence of the Legion's manifestation have their machine spirits badly traumatized, with only the most skilled Magals or Tech Marines being able to coax them back into regular service. Any further investigations into the Legion are also made all the more difficult, as many witnesses forget the intervention of the damned. Investigators prefer to meet any witnesses hours after the event, but sometimes everything is already fully forgotten within days. Yet these same witnesses are on occasion left with a lingering scent of burned flesh that can last weeks, years, or even a lifetime. However, we have not yet covered the most frightening detail of the Legion, namely the reckoning that occurs after a battle. According to Brother Sergeant Atticus Centurius, there is no miracle without loss, no loss without ultimate recompense, a rising tally with a debt that must be paid in souls. To give some more context on this debt, a company of Space Marines from an unnamed chapter are defending a world that stores great reliquaries for the Imperium. The Space Marines are fighting off an orc invasion that is about to overrun them. To deny them the chance of looting the relics, Captain Enriquez orders the catacombs to be rigged with explosives to collapse the basilicae and with it the reliquaries. Before Tech Marine Marco can pull the trigger, he is stopped by Centurius of the Legion of the Damned. The Legion of the Damned then break the Orc Wa. Captain Ericus, however, almost dies, but Centurius needs the captain to pay his price. The final thing to understand, the Legion of the Damned do seem to be able to communicate. They do this through some form of telepathy, but they rarely communicate to anyone who survives their arrival, which is why every other record depicts them as utterly silent. The price that Sergeant Centurius asked is pretty horrific, as seen in the short story Animus Malorum. "What does it want from me, Marco?" Surprisingly, it was Centurius that answered directly, though his voice was just as haunting and terrible as Ericus could have ever imagined. "We would have you, Captain Ericus. We would claim you as a worthy member of the Legion. You were ready to give your life in defense of this world, and even in death to deny it to the foe. From the bones of your noble kind were the foundations of the Imperium once built. Where you lead, others follow without question." Ericus could barely speak. Disbelief, horror, righteousness, humility all fought within his being as he struggled to take in the dead warrior's words, though he found that he did not want to hear them. "As a martyr you will be wasted. As a legionary you will be eternal." Fumbling weakly at the edge of the pallet with his good hand, Ericus tried to reach out to Marco. Brother, am I dead?" The tech marine smiled one last time. "Not dead, my lord. Dead men do not perform the Emperor's will." His eyes growing dim and his gaze drifting, Ericus lay back upon the pallet. He would have sworn that he could hear voices in the growing shadows at the corners of the chamber. "What must I do?" he whispered. Marco laid a hand upon the captain's brow, his fingers tracing 3 titanium surface studs embedded there. "Give yourself to it, my lord. Give yourself to the Legion and redress the balance." Ericus stared at the polished, oversized skull in the box held out before him by Centurius. He stared into the infinite, timeless abyss that yawned in its sightless eyes. It was like a grim mirror held up to reveal the fate of all man that lived and died in this cold and pitiless galaxy. And in that moment, he saw the truth of Centurius's brotherhood. It was the truth too of the Animus Malorum, and Ericus would have wept for them all, had he any longer possessed eyes or hearts or even a soul of his own. Brother Marco offered up a prayer and drew the tin blanket up to cover his captain's lifeless features. Of Captain Ericus's company, only 17 battle brothers and Tech Marine Marco survived. The civilians they had saved were utterly horrified at their saviors, who slaughtered Marco and his brothers. In a cruel twist of fate, everyone but Marco was taken by the Legion. The Tech Marine had tried to fight back, not understanding just how deep the depth of the Legion is. And so, Centurius ordered his soul forfeit. His sacrifice would have been hollow. While Marco's brother would serve the Legion, Marco's soul was used as a sacrifice to pay the debt. Right, switching over from facts to theories. Let's go over some of the most common theories in the community about the Legion of the Damned, starting with, well, their origins. Where do the Legion of the Damned actually come from? Number 1. The Lost Legions of Isfahan. There are many theories about the origins of the Legion, both in and out of universe. The most popular theory within the community is that the Legion of the Damned are the fallen loyalists of Isfahan, manifested into fireborn spirits who want vengeance. In fact, people even go as far as to say that it is the Legion of the Damned that appears in the novel Master of Mankind when the Emperor arrives to turn the tide of battle. So, while this entire scene is awesome, I am just going to focus on the following paragraph and what the author, Aaron Dembski-Bowden, said himself. Shapes raged in the flames, shadows and suggestions doing battle with the demons, their fiery forms indistinct and ever-changing, the fireborn avatars of the fallen 10,000, knee-deep in psychic fire and thrusting with lances of flame, the silhouettes of space marines, the betrayed dead of Isfahan bearing axes and blades and claws, half-seen sigils of slaughtered legions, obscured by the ash of their blackened armor. A giant among giants, its great hands bared and ready as it seared forward at the crest of the tidal fire, the 10th son of a dying empire, so briefly reborn in his father's immolating wrath. What the Emperor summons in the webway is not the Legion of the Damned. The more you think about it, what he summoned were shadows that were fighting in the fires he summoned against the demonic hordes. These shadows took up the forms of the Custodes, Space Marines from Istvan and Ferrus Manus, but that is all they are, shadows. The Emperor is often called heartless, and while there is a truth to it, he deeply cares about symbology. So what better way to defeat the demons than with his most loyal warriors? People also keep insisting that the Emperor brought back Ferrus during this single fight. In the novel The End in the Death Volume 2, this claim, however, gets disproven. Before Horus fights Sanguinius, he summons the actual soul of Ferrus to talk to him. Ferrus himself outright explains to Sanguinius that Horus only brought him back to show how powerful he truly is. And to put the final nail in the coffin, Aaron Dembski Bowden, who wrote Master of Mankind, replied to someone claiming Ferrus Manus was summoned by the Emperor by saying, "I suspect that wasn't literally Ferrus Manus in the webway." So yeah, even the writer himself said it. Theory number 2. They are the warp-changed Firehawks. Alright, let's talk about the theory that is often claimed as a direct answer to the origins of the Legion of the Damned and where it actually came from. In White Dwarf 99, which was released during the Rogue Trader era, we are introduced to the Legion of the Damned. In this issue, we are given the direct origins of the Legion. This story talks about how the Firehawks disappeared in 963 M41, while en route to the Kraus World subsector. After their disappearance, the Legion of the Damned appeared. It is outright stated that they used to be the Firehawks. Yet the chapter suffered from some form of warp disease or mutation, which led to slow and agonizing deaths. Only 200 Astartes survived, driven to the edge of insanity. They decided to serve the Imperium until they were no more. The disease or mutation left the Astartes rotten, sick as their bodies literally decayed, yet they were given supernatural vigor and gained increased strength. They were also immune to psychic attacks, with everyone also gaining certain psychic powers. Finally, when death gripped a damned legionary, they went into what was called a berserk death spasm, as the raw energies of the warp were at their height. But this specific version of events is from Rogue Trader, covering an area of lore that has now changed a lot. Now, if you like this version of the story, I have got some good news. A part of it is still very much canon. According to the Bad of War books, the Firehawks disappeared in 963 M41, while en route to the Kraus World. The detail of the Firehawks' disappearance have remained completely the same. In fact, this old piece of lore that used to be the actual answer has become an in-universe theory. While there are many theories within the Imperium, which I will cover in a moment, among the Adeptus Astartes, some believe the Legion of the Damned to be the Firehawks. This theory is based on the idea that the fires of the warp have claimed the Firehawks and turned them into something more sinister. It has been recorded well enough that throughout Imperial history, Space Marines have disappeared into the warp to either never return or come back changed. Officially 20 years after their disappearance, the Firehawks were declared Perdisha, which means lost. The Bell of Lost Souls tolled 1,000 times, and a black candle was lit in the Chapel of Fallen Heroes on Terra. Those who hold onto the Firehawk theory think that the Firehawks have survived some form of metamorphosis, where they became changed beings who are dying and alive at the same time. The Firehawks then became the Legion of the Damned, knowing they could never openly serve the Emperor. I think it's pretty cool that the old Rogue Trader lore has been turned into an in-universe theory. It's a great way to reuse old pieces of lore that are no longer canon. Theory number 3. Psychic Backlash and Imperial Demons. Not all Space Marines, however, believe in the Firehawks theory. Some scholars of the Adeptus Astartes argue that the Legion is a psychic backlash made real. Their argument is based on the fact that events such as the Istvan massacres or the death of a Primarch are so traumatic that they left a permanent scar on all first founding legions. A scar that is so deep that even hundreds of successors might suffer from it. Ever since the Horus Heresy, loyalist Space Marines have a deep-rooted belief that any betrayal must be avenged to the extreme. The scholars argue that because of the librarians, they have made this belief real by accident or design. The Legion of the Damned are the fallen ghosts of their battle brothers, given the chance to avenge their deaths. Some Space Marine librarians argue, however, that the Legion of the Damned might be a hallucination, with an occasional manifestation brought about not just by Space Marines, but humanity as a whole. This is a rather interesting theory that tries to push the existence of the Legion of the Damned away from the Astartes and into something created by all of mankind. This theory, however, is not unfounded. Humanity has proven itself to have nascent psychic abilities, and when threatened with imminent death, it affects the warp. While a single man, even a psyker, could not create something like the Legion of the Damned, uncounted trillions who venerate the Emperor's angels together can definitely manifest the Legion. Where this theory loses ground, however, is the part where it is seen as a hallucination. The Legion of the Damned very much so are real, so are their bolters, and so is their burning desire for vengeance. Inquisitor Quixos, however, has a much darker theory. Quixos argues that the fate in the Emperor has bestowed him with the ability to create a caste of supernatural agents. The Inquisitor goes as far as to compare the Emperor to the Dark Gods and the Legion to their demonic servants. The Inquisitor calls them the Angels Mortis, shards of the Emperor's will given form. He also believes that the Legion are but a lesser form of these shards, and that we are yet to see their greater forms. Their appearance is also often found in places where the barrier between the warp and reality are thin. Of course, as you can imagine, all of this resulted in Quixos being called a heretic. He would end up getting killed by Inquisitor Eisenhorn and his records would be purged. Inquisitor Quixos, however, had some strange supporters in this theory, specifically the Eldari, who also outright call the Legion of the Damned demons, who deserve to be destroyed alongside the servants of the Dark Gods. What makes this theory concerning, however, is that the Legion of the Damned protects the devout above all others, something we get to see in Ship of the Damned, as the legionaries come to save an entire pilgrim vessel from plague zombies. Sister Dialogus Agenta had just started to apply pressure to the trigger when the constant warmth at her thigh became a burning sensation. She tried to ignore the pain, but some compulsion forced her to lower the pistol and remove the sphere from her pocket. Bizarrely, the object felt stone cold in her hand, but the tracery burned with an intensity that was painful for her to look at. New symbols and runes that she had not seen before, but in an ancient language familiar to her, manifested across its surface in an instant. She knew what she had to do with it. The room lit up again, and with the plague zombie horde almost an arm's length away, she held the orb in both hands and twisted it hard, rotating around a previously unseen seam. Its glow took on an unnatural blue aspect. The loom globe went out. This time it did not come back on. Agenta's nostrils filled with the scent of scorched ozone, and every hair on her body rose, charged by static. Dolgun buried his head back in her robes again, sparing him the temporary blindness of the teleportation flash as multiple bulky figures materialized into the room. Suddenly, the room lit up with the unmistakable muzzle flare of bolters, the noise of weapons unbearable in such a confined space. Agenta could feel the heat of the discharge and the splatter of plague zombies bursting open under the intense barrage. After 2 seconds, the firing ceased, although use being in the close proximity to bolter fire. Agenta could do nothing to prevent the inevitable ringing in her ears, and as her vision righted itself after the intense burst of the teleportation flare, she could hear nothing. Dolgun still clung tightly to her, and she looked down at him, his shape unclear through her hazy vision. What she could make out, even with her sight impaired more than it usually was the boy that was pointing. Following the line of his shaking finger, Agenta was startled to find that one of their mysterious saviors remained in the room. She held up the sphere, its glow slowly fading, and the blue light got the edges of what she instantly recognized as power armor. Space Marine power armor. The same compulsion that had come over her when she had activated the device took hold of her again, and she moved forwards, each step revealing more of the massive figure rooted to the spot before her. One vast pauldron sported a simple skull icon, while the other was decorated with a flame motif that was repeated across both greaves. The black of the armor was the deepest Agenta had ever seen, and it seemed to swallow what little light the sphere gave off. She came to a halt less than a meter in front of him and held up the orb, offering it back to what she believed to be its rightful owner. The Space Marine looked down at Agenta and regarded her. To the Sister Dialogus, it felt as if he was peering into her very soul. Holding it up to the light and examining it for any flaw or imperfection, Agenta gave an involuntary shudder, not because of the biting cold, but out of fear. Fear that the Space Marine might look inside her and find her wanting. The last of the orb's light faded, and the armored figure reached out with a gauntleted hand. Agenta closed her eyes. When she opened them, the Habdorn was lit up again, but the Space Marine and the sphere were gone. In this short story, we also get to learn from Sister Agenta that her pilgrim vessel had saved the survivors from another vessel. Among them was a young boy named Dolgan. The other survivors refused to share what allowed them to survive for so long, but Dolgan claimed a Space Marine gave him the object Agenta used to summon the Legion of the Damned. The entire vessel was purged of plague zombies in less than 5 minutes, and the legionaries disappeared. Yet when Agenta went to bed, she found the same object under her pillow again. Theory number 4. They are warp ghosts. The simplest theory, however, is that the Legion are simply ghosts. The Legion of the Damned are the spiritual echoes of once great Space Marines, whose hatred was so powerful it went beyond mortal limits. If this is true, the Legion of the Damned will be descended from every chapter and replace their old heraldry with unifying icons of doom. Some have seen the Legion without their helmets and described them as having a ghostly pale visage, sunken skin and hollowed eye sockets. Every supernatural occurrence, every glitch in reality that is attributed to these mysterious warriors adds credence to this theory. Perhaps those who know of their existence prefer to imagine the spectral Space Marines as revenants. For what mortal mind could stand a life bound to the hell dimension of the warp and remain sane? And our last theory. They are the products of warp contagion and perpetual martyrdom. Our final theory will be Quadrimesta's Thesis of Perpetual Martyrdom, a report commissioned by the High Lords of Terra themselves. This thesis goes back to the warp contagion, arguing that the Legion isolates itself to not spread its disease. Knowing that their days are numbered, the Legion of the Damned seeks out the enemies of mankind to punish them while they still can. This same warp contagion also gives the Legion many unnatural abilities, yet where it falls flat is how Quadrimesta argues that the souls of a Legionnaire can be reborn like that of a banished demon. He also calls the berserk death spasms pyromortis, which in turn fuels the perpetual martyrdom theory, as only the most loyal souls would accept such a horrendous end to serve mankind. In another work of Quadrimesta, the Tarot Symbiosis, it also puts forward that the Legion of the Damned have an uncanny ability to read the Emperor's Tarot. This in turn results in the Legion intervening in the most important battles. Their actions have saved the lives of tech priests who find STCs, which resulted in entire wars being won. Other times, they have saved a single man, whose future actions turn into a greater cause for the Imperium. Essentially, the Legion of the Damned will sometimes steal the jobs from the Aquilian shields, The Aquilian shields essentially go out to protect people who are thought to be essential to the Emperor's safety, which, in my opinion, is pretty funny. The Legion of the Damned are competing with the Custodes. So those were the most common theories that all hold some ground, but lose credibility when you look at the current greater picture of 40k. However, speaking of the greater picture and history of Warhammer, where have the Legion of the Damned been recently? Are there any clues to what they are up to? The Imperium has weathered a great many storms throughout the millennia, but few would ever prove as apocalyptic as the 13th Black Crusade. While the warriors of the Emperor were pressed thin and fought all over the galaxy, the Legion of the Damned had to pick its fights carefully. When the Iron Warrior Warsmith Sean II and the Demon Prince Be'lakor attacked the Phalanx, Terra itself became endangered. The Imperial Fist were spread thin like the rest of the Imperium, with only the 3rd Company and half of its 1st Company present on the Phalanx. Be'lakor wanted to cheat Abaddon by destroying Holy Terra using the Phalanx, yet the Imperial Fist refused to let this happen, instead choosing to sacrifice part of the vessel and entering the Warp. Inside the Warp, however, Be'lakor managed to almost perfectly stack the deck until the Legion of the Damned intervened. The Damned Legionaries burst Be'lakor's host, while the Iron Warriors were beaten by the Imperial Fists. Yet instead of disappearing, the Legion stayed aboard the Phalanx, when its commander, Captain Garradon, Commodore Travax, and veteran Sergeant Furen received news of Cadia being attacked. An argument broke out. Furen and the Commodore were unwilling to risk the Phalanx in deploying it to Cadia, but Captain Garradon overruled them. What shook the Imperial Fist captain, however, was that one of the Damned Legionary sergeants observed the debate and quietly approved of his decision. When the Phalanx arrived at Cadia, the Legion of the Damned left the Phalanx to immediately take the battle to the Black Legion. On the Elysian fields, the Legion stood watch, and while Belisarius attempted to activate the pylons, the Legion fiercely fought against the demonic hordes of Abaddon. Yet when the pylons were activated, the Legion of the Damned were banished alongside the demons of chaos, and they would not reappear for some time. In an event dubbed the Hour of the Damned, the Imperium was cut off from the Astronomicon and interstellar communication. The light of the Emperor and the hope it gave flickered in the darkness. Yet it is within this darkest hour that the Legion of the Damned strode forth from the abyss. They arrived as a Legion of Vengeance, a brotherhood of flame that illuminated Baal, Armageddon, antagonists, and hundreds of other worlds. When the enemies of man thought the Imperium weak, they were punished by the terrible bolters and chainswords of the Legion. Even Rabute Gilliman's Terran Crusade would be aided by the Legion to escape the Red Corsairs. They had arrived unlooked for, and they vanished without a trace. But this hour will be the last major sighting of the Legion. So where have they been since? Have they sacrificed everything to prevent the complete collapse of the Imperium? And has their debt finally taken them away? In the era Indomitus and Gilliman's return, we have indeed seen very little to nothing of the Legion. It almost makes you wonder if their duty to the Emperor is finally done. But we do learn one thing. In Dark Imperium Plague War, Kugat Plaguefather tells Mortarion that with Gilliman back, there have been more Saints of the Emperor and his unliving legions have been seen more. These are all signs that the Master of Mankind is gathering strength again. So for now, that leaves the current status of the Legion of the Damned as mysterious as their origin. One of the biggest revelations from the Dark Imperium trilogy is that the God Emperor is powerful enough to face chaos once again. So that means that perhaps the Legion of the Damned might also have become more powerful. And if we get to see them again, we might even see greater forms like dreadnoughts or even tanks, as Inquisitor Quixels theorized. I mentioned them before, so it's time we give them a proper section in this video, as they are actually really deeply intertwined with the Legion of the Damned. Who are the Ordo Chronos, and what do they want with the Legionaries? Although investigations into the Legion of the Damned are conducted by plenty of organizations within the Imperium, few concern themselves as much with it as the Ordo Chronos. As a whole, the Imperium wants to capture the peculiar abilities of the Legion to harness them against their enemies. Specifically, the Legion's capability of traveling the warp and appearing wherever they want at will is a much desired ability. The Imperium has even noted seeing the same legionaries appear on one battlefield, only to reappear on another in mere seconds. In the case of the Astigmata anomaly, it has even been seen that the same legionaries fought in 2 different battles at the same time. Some have taken these incidents as proof that the Legion are masters of the warp, much like the embodiments of the Dark Gods. It's a disturbing thought, even for those who have witnessed the Legion fighting hard to save Imperial lives. The Legion also tends to appear at critical times, never late, never early, and in the best position to defeat their enemies. Being able to replicate this ability for the Imperium could lead to unimagined potential for the Imperium, so the Ordo Chronos continues its quest. Within the Ordo Chronos, entire lifetimes have been spent pursuing first-hand sightings. These agents would have given their lives to do so, but mysterious events keep making it impossible. From landslides to mass aneurysms, the Ordo Chronos faces an impossible conspiracy. It is as if the Legion will not allow itself to be interrogated and have power to assure that such an encounter does not come to pass. Thankfully, we have one member of the Ordo Chronos who encountered the Legion and lived to tell the tale. Acolyte Delegate Mercist joined her Inquisitor in dealing with the Eldar of Craftworld Iyanden in hopes of working against the forces of Chaos. Yet when one of the Farseers peered into the future, he declared that the Forge World of Alvastus must be destroyed. He claimed the Forge World would be captured by Chaos and lead to a great catastrophe. Right there with Inquisitor Mirgus and his acolyte present, the Seers of Iyanden agreed to cripple the entire system of Alvastis to avoid this. Although the Inquisitor and Acolyte Delegate were outraged, the Legion of the Damned suddenly appeared. The Inquisition already knew any ordinary form of teleportation was impossible as the Eldar blocked such attempts. Yet in mere moments, the Seers and Commanders of Iyanden were all dead. By chance, whatever device was blocking teleportation was broken. Inquisitor Mirgus was slain during the brief fight, but his retinue managed to escape. Acolyte Delegate had this to say on the event, as seen in the Codex Legion of the Damned 6th edition. In attacking as suddenly and efficiently as they did, the Legion of the Damned not only saved our lives, but also those of every soul in the Alvastis system. I contend their summonation was triggered not by our presence, but by the very delving into the time stream that the Xenos Witch had hoped would guide his people to safety. I believe the Legion to be echoes from an alternative future, presumably sent back to ensure that the course of fate is steered in the favor of mankind. I have to believe this, to seek succor in the concept, for the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. The Acolyte also notes how the Legionaries and their fallen disappear in a shimmer. The idea that the Legion of the Damned hunt those down who try to change the future is pretty frightening. Acolyte Delegate's current status is sadly unknown, with the Ordo Chronos last seen debating whether a promotion or execution was deserved. Now that we have gone over what they are, and how in-lore characters believe they work, let's take a look at their rather unique and weird Wargear and skill set. The Legion of the Damned are strange. At their core, the Legion of the Damned are very much still Space Marines. Aside from their bolters, they are known for using melta and flame weapons. Of course, these are not their only weapons. The very air around them ignites into a weapon itself. Most enemies who stand against the Legion have their morale broken by images of fire and death. As we have seen earlier, the fire of the damned only ever attack their enemies. The Legion also uses illusions in battle, and they are invisible on thermal scopes. It might also be fun to know that the flames are both sculpted onto their armor and actually appear around them at the same time. When their armor is pierced, flames tend to erupt before their armor fixes itself. We also know about one relic, the Animus Malorum, carried by veteran Sergeant Atticus Centurius. We saw the Sergeant carry it in a wooden box. With it, he turned Captain Ericus into a legionary and killed Marco. In other accounts, it is said the Sergeant carries it into battle, but other claims it is part of his armor. In any case, the skull that is the Animus Malorum withers its enemies using the energies drawn from the target's own soul. When using the skull, Centurius becomes immune to any attack, which often passes right through him. This weapon, however, goes further than just killing enemies. In the middle of battle, fallen legionaries can be brought back, their armor reformed and flesh knit together once more. Now, I have two more stories to talk about to perfectly showcase just how insane the Legion of the Damned are. The first is when they appeared in a sub-realm of Gomorrah and killed everything. Archon Kulak was putting on a spectacular show for his guests, where two twin witches were hunting a squad of Vostroyans. For the Vostroyans, everything was an illusion from the moment they were captured. These guardsmen relived their last battle, the battle where their morale broke, and they ran. To truly savor the moment, the Archon put up a fake bastion that the Vostroyans thought could save them. The two witches, however, already brutally killed all of the Vostroyans except one before reaching it. Yet this last Vostroyan watched as these hunters were ripped apart by a black-armored and bone-clad Astartes. The presence of this damned legionary literally made the witches feel complete terror. Archon Kulak was sad to see his witches dead, but he was impressed with the show his slave masters put on. That was at least until his slave master admitted to having never seen the Astartes before. Hursk, the surviving Vostroyan, was heavily bleeding, but he looked in amazement as the Archon summoned concealed cannons and ordered his warriors to attack the strange legionary. Before the Drukhari could open fire, however, the legionary was in their midst, and he was not alone. In literal seconds, the amphitheater was overrun with avenging legionaries. Not a single one of the Xenos survived. The Archon, his elite warriors, all of his guests, who were all armed, were all dead. Hursk, now alone, walked up to the bastion, and he realized it was actually taken from the battlefield he fought on. The Drukhari made a fatal error. Inside was a reliquary of a fallen space marine. Only the skeleton and armor of the warrior had remained. Hursk recognized him as the legionary who first appeared. Hursk wanted to escape the torture, but the only way out was death. So the legionary not only absolved Hursk of his duty, but burned him to ash to ensure the Xenos had nothing to resurrect. The last story I want to talk about is from a short story called Remorseless. In Remorseless, we follow the Iron Warriors besieging a hive city from the perspective of Scaranx. Scaranx is a glandhound that the Iron Warriors bought from Fabius Bile. Scaranx and the other glandhounds were used to kill loyalist Astartes and take their gene seed, while the glandhounds could not beat Astartes by themselves. When working together or using a mob of traitor guardsmen, they had a frighteningly high success rate. Yet during this siege, Scaranx's hunt would be interrupted by the Legion of the Damned. At first, they only appeared on the periphery of his view, distracting him so that the Imperial Fist he hunted spotted him. During his battle with the Imperial Fist, Scaranx would lose a couple dozen traitor guardsmen, but managed to kill the Astartes. He took the loyalist gene seed, but was then interrupted. The surviving traitor guardsmen were already looting as well, but what happens next is best explained with the following excerpt from Remorseless. Scarang saw one of the Brigannians wrestling open the reliquary that had hung from the dead Space Marine's hip while his companions were occupied. The man attacked the ancient, lacquered wood with his bayonet, gouging the faceplate loose. The conversations on the Vox fell silent. Everything went quiet, as if the cherubs that crouched at the shadowed corners of what was left of the archways were holding their breath. Scarang's perception shifted and warped. He could see the smoke that lay like a shroud over the ruin, thickening and solidifying around the trooper as he reached into the reliquary and pried loose the object within. It was a skeletal hand, clenched into a fist. The yellowing bones scrimshawed with curt, intricate characters, whose meaning Scarangs could not discern. The trooper held it up for a moment, eyeing it. Then, satisfied that it held no intrinsic word, he tossed it aside. It never struck the ground. A hand, garbed in night black armor, fell atop the looter's head. The fingers, painted to resemble fleshless digits, closed almost gently on the unfortunate trooper's pate. Bones cracked and burst, and the man screamed in agony. The others rolled their shot to their feet, comically slow to Scarangs' altered perceptions. More figures, clad in black plate and surrounded by flickering halos of ghost light, glided soundlessly from the smoke. Or perhaps they were the smoke, given form and flesh. A chainsword revved soundlessly and swept down to split the screaming soldier in two, slopping gore across his fellows. Otto, still at the window, made to fire his last gun when hands wreathed in smoke and flame grabbed him from behind, from within the very brick of the wall, and broke him like a child's toy. Black shapes oozed through the wall, hefting bone-gripped bolters that roared like dragons as they spat flame and death. Shapes stalked through the smoke. They were Space Marines, but not any kind Scarangs recognized. They flickered and faded, bleeding in and out of sight like phantom spots on his retinas. Flames licked the oily air about them, and their char-black power armor was covered in gleaming bone, bleached painfully white. They seemed to have no more substance than shadows in one moment, and then more solid than anything around them in the next. He could not even tell how many of them there were. The bolters spoke death, spitting burning bolt rounds into the Brigannians, tearing the hapless soldiers apart with hellish ease. Scarang stood, rooted to the spot. He felt a flicker of something in his gut, a quaver of sensation that he had not felt since he had first gone under the benefactor's knives. He could only watch as men died, except for the one who'd opened the reliquary. He clawed at his punctured skull and wailed like a broken-backed cat as he was held aloft by his attacker. Flame curled from the fingers that pierced his skull, dripping across his blood and grime-streaked flesh, and then enveloped him with a greedy whoosh. He kicked and screamed for long moments, thrashing in obvious agony, his cries bouncing from the arch to grinning cherubs before spiraling up into the air. Then, he made no more sounds and hung limp. His killer dropped him. It was over in an eye blink. 15 men died in as many moments, their bodies lying spoiled and burned on the ground, spreading out in a circle around the body of the Space Marine. The skeletal fist had been placed back in its reliquary, which sat beside the corpse of its owner. Scarangs realized that he was clutching the cylinder with the progenoid gland. He looked around, eyes glowed hot in the swirling gloom. They were all around him, waiting, but for what he couldn't say. They filled the ruin, from one end of the nave to the next. A congregation of bone and fire, and all eyes were on him. Something rattled. 2 helmets, which superficially resembled his own, were tossed up to him. Both were ruined and dripping. He kicked them aside. He heard the telltale clatter of progenoid vials. A hand was raised, and 2 bandoliers identical to his dangled from it, the cylinders catching the firelight as they shifted slightly in the breeze. Some of the cylinders were occupied with the 2 or 3 progenoid glands, glistening wetly. He felt a flare of annoyance that the others had beaten him by such a wide margin. The bandoliers fell, and the sound they made when they struck the ground put Scarangs in the mind of the Imperial Fist body toppling over. A hand pierced the smoke, 1 finger extended. Scarangs touched his prize to reassure himself that it was still there. Whoever they were, he knew what they wanted. "No," he said. Oh yeah, not only do the legionaries ambush Scaranx, they demand he return the gene seed. Scaranx, however, refuses. He even goes as far as to steal the bandoliers of the 2 dead Glandhounds and proceeds to run. In their pursuit, the entire Iron Warrior siege was broken. Demon engines were torn apart, entire regiments of traitor guards cut down, and the Iron Warriors too were killed. In his mind, Scaranx was being taunted by the legionaries. They asked if he was afraid. They told him to return the gene seed, and he would be given a quick death. Scaranx was a product of bile, and normally was immune to fear, but against the walking dead, he felt true terror. Worst of all was that he realized that everything the servants of chaos taught him was a lie. The Iron Warriors were no gods. Scaranx was not special. Before dying, Scaranx tried to give back the gene seed, but when he did, he realized it was charred and pierced by broken metal. The very same Imperial Fist he had just killed had come back as a legionary, and for destroying his progenoid gland, he would make Scaranx burn. In conclusion, the Legion of the Damned are easily one of the most underrated pieces of Warhammer 40k lore. Although some people voice frustrations at GW writing things that are shrouded in mystery, the Legion of the Damned manages to really capture the imagination and speculation of the community. If you ask me, I think there is some form of truth in all of the theories we have discussed today. The Legion of the Damned are definitely a type of demon. They might indeed be the byproducts of humanity's fear and hope. They could also be the ghosts of actual Astartes given a new form. I can also not state enough that I really enjoy how the Rogue Trader lore was reintroduced as the in-universe theory of some people. For this video, I did have to skip certain appearances, as this script was getting rather long, and I wanted to put an emphasis on the stories that most people often overlook. I personally love Sergeant Centurius, and I really hope we get a new model, as his original 2nd edition model was really cool. At the end of the day, however, the Legion of the Damned are the embodiment of vengeance for the Imperium. They show up where they need to show up, they kill what needs killing, and then they disappear. I genuinely think they are mimicking the Emperor in needing to be fed souls to continue living. Although I specifically covered how Ferrus Manus is not related to the Legion of the Damned, I do want to say that GW has written themselves into a position that, if they wanted to, they could actually bring him back as the Primarch of the Legion of the Damned. But what do you think about all of this? Do you love the Legion of the Damned as much as I do? Do you want to see more of them in the new lore of 40k? And what are your favorite theories about them? Let me know your comments, concerns, suggestions, theories and ideas down in the comment section below. If you think I deserved it with this video, please leave a like and hit that subscribe button. It helps push this video into the algorithm and it would make me very happy. Thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next one. Bye bye.